Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brian Wolff, Executive Vice President of Policy and External Affairs at Edison Electric Institute. We appreciate you joining us today, and also thank you for those also joining us virtually today. This is our Driving Progress with regards to sustainable transportation. This is probably the most exciting panel for me here at the COP because it is the most timely panel with the bipartisan infrastructure package passing last night that really invests $7.5 billion in electric transportation with regards to EVs, ferries, electric buses. So this panel is really excited. Not only do we have a great soccer game going on here today, but I've got two global leaders joining me today. Pedro Pizarro, who is actually my vice chair at EEI. He's going to be our chairman in June of 2023. I'm really excited about that. Pedro is the chief executive for Edison International in California, and we're joined by Arshad Mansoor, who's the chief executive for the Electric Power Research Institute. And Arshad is a master of many things, both technically and policy-wise, with the work that EPRI does in this space as well. So not only do I have the two best people here to talk about it, Pedro also chairs the Electric Transportation Task Force at Edison Electric Institute. So he is not only leading the transformation within the power sector, but the work that EPRI actually does in the transportation sector is enabling the investor-owned utilities that I represent and EEI represents. It's helping us really transition and make that a lot more, let's just say, accelerated with regards to our future. We already anticipate about 50% of all vehicles on the road will be electric by 2030. Also, EEI anticipates and estimates that approximately 18.7 million cars will be on the road, electric vehicles, by 2030. So this is a really timely conversation, and I wanted both of you to share a little bit about your vision, not only, Pedro, with Edison's approach to electric transportation and your commitment to your communities that you serve, but also give us just a little bit more about your priorities at EEI and what you have us on the path to.
Terrific. Well, thanks a lot, Brian, and thanks for everybody who's joining us in the room and online now and online later, too. Really appreciate the chance to talk about this really critical piece of the clean energy transition. And one of the things that struck me over the past week at COP26 is that there is a sense of real urgency and commitment. Obviously, a lot more work to be done, but globally, we have to make meaningful reductions in emissions. Otherwise, we're going to face a global crisis that will easily eclipse the pandemic that we've all been making our way through. Let me start with a California perspective, and then I'll turn to a national perspective, Brian. In California, our company has goals aligned with the Paris Agreement. The state does as well. Edison International has committed to Scope 1, 2, and 3, net zero emissions by 2045. And one of the things we've done is to take a look at how the California economy, which is the world's fifth largest economy at $3 trillion, can get to net zero carbon by 2045 most affordably and most reliably. And we've done a series of analyses on this, published a series of white papers. One of them, Pathway 2045, published in 2019, basically demonstrated that you can get there by electrifying a lot of society through using clean electricity and storage, along with energy efficiency, which is really important. One of the big levers in other sectors, though, as we think about electrification, is transportation, which for California is about 50% of emissions today. And so we see a big task ahead. It's doable, but that calls for 8 million passenger vehicles being electric in California by 2030 and 26 million by 2045. So our Southern California Edison utility, which serves 15 million people, has been really active in developing programs to help advance charging infrastructure, including what is today the nation's largest charging program by any investor-owned utility, with $436 million dedicated towards bringing 38,000 passenger-level chargers in our territory through the next 4 or 5 years, as well as another $350 million for heavy-duty charging. Now, one other piece of that is that, particularly on the residential side, the passenger side, it's so important that this be a just transition. And so half of the funding that we have gotten approval for from our PUC is targeted at low income and disadvantaged communities, as well as multiple unit dwellings, where get more challenges in accessing charging infrastructure, because we need to make sure that this transition is one that everybody can access. On the national side, as you said, Brian, I'm really happy to co-chair the CEO Task Force on Transportation Electrification at EEI. And what's been fascinating and rewarding about it is that it's really powered by association, which is our industry's motto. We've been able to share best practices across utilities. There's frankly some innovative things we've done in California we've been able to share, but we've learned from our peers elsewhere. And that's not just important in terms of the utilities learning from each other, it's also important in recognizing that we all live under different state regulatory domains. There's different rules, but we have common customers. So when you're thinking about large fleet operators who are doing work in all 50 states, when you think about the OEMs and the charging companies that are looking at deploying equipment all around the country, life is kind of challenging when you're dealing with very different solutions on a state-by-state basis. We can't solve all of that because some of it stems from regulatory requirements, but we can solve a lot of it because we can find ways to manage through that and provide a more common experience to our customers and our equipment manufacturers. Electric companies across the U.S. are committed to this. They are already investing more than $3 billion to deploy charging infrastructure and to help accelerate electric transportation. That's not just investing in our own grids. In many cases, it's investing on the customer side of the meter, and it's also investing in education, right? Education for the consumer, education for others across the ecosystem that'll be needed here. It's going to take all of us working together, and a lot of work ahead. I'm sure we'll get into the details as we go forward, but I am excited by what's going on, and it's doable.
Arshad. Well, first, welcome to all of you joining us online and those of you who are here. It's a rainy day in Glasgow, but it's a bright day today because we woke up with the news of one of the largest investment that will be made in the world for clean energy transition, the infrastructure bill that was passed yesterday. And I'm wearing the America is All In badge, and we are all in. And our aspirations of reducing CO2 greenhouse gas is now becoming ambitions. Our ambitions are now being held with targets near term 2030, and now we are backed by investment and funding with a plan to do that. So it is an exciting day. I think from electric transportation point of view, I always go back to what Pedro mentioned, the community that needs it the most. And that's not just in US, it's the community that needs it most in other countries. I grew up in Bangladesh. I can see the benefit of air quality if mass transit in Bangladesh is electrified. I can see the benefit on air quality, emission reduction, health, if the transit authorities all over US can electrify. And that's going to happen with this infrastructure bill. But most importantly, this is the decade that we will make a dent on transportation, the mobility for people that drives car. In countries like US, we have more cars than people. So an average US household with $45,000 annual income has 2 cars. If those 2 cars are electrified, and the automotive industry is saying we're 3 years away from first cost parity, so it's not going to be expensive to buy the car. But if they're electrified and they have charging infrastructure, they'll save $1,000 a year out of their $45,000 on their energy bill. Their electricity bill will go up, but their gasoline bill will go down. But they will also save $500 on the O&M cost of running the car for 10 years, because every study has shown that electric transportation has 30 to 50% lower O&M cost. You don't have to change the brake shoes that much. That's a $1,500 savings for this average family, and they don't have $1,500 in their emergency fund. But it's not going to happen unless we as a society make an ambitious goal like we did in 1930 when we said, we're going to put transmission lines and distribution lines, even if it's only 4 farmers. That's the Rural Electrification Act. We need to now see that electrifying mobility, transportation, the air quality benefit, the affordability of energy benefit, and the greenhouse gas benefit is so profound that we need to make sure this underserved community get access to charging infrastructure, whether they're in a townhouse or an apartment or in their neighborhood. Right now, we are not there. If you look at the charging infrastructures, SC is leading in putting charging infrastructures ahead of time before we have reached first cost parity. We need to make a case with the benefit cost assessment of air quality, greenhouse gas, and affordability that we need to build it before this cost parity of EV happens. So it's an exciting day.
Yeah, pretty exciting. Pedro has a motto that he goes by, which is, if they build it, they will come. And that's with regards to infrastructure and your approach to that. One of the issues I wanted you to talk about, Pedro, because you originated something in the task force at EEI, and it was really around fleet commitments. Which is really not only, it's our industry really walking the walk, talking the talk with regards to our fleet commitments for light, medium, and heavy duty vehicles. So can you talk about that? Because you introduced that, it's off the ground. I think that it's really probably transformed our own sector with regard to electric transportation. So I wanted you to just talk about that for a second.
Well, Brian, it's all about realizing that we can't be talking to our customers about electrifying if we're not doing it ourselves. Right? So we need to show our own commitment. Southern California Edison, we've committed to electrifying 100% of our light duty vehicles, 30% of medium duty, 8% of heavy duty, and 60% of forklifts by 2030. And we thought that it'd be good to ask our peers at EEI, are you willing to step up to commitments too? And we had tremendous participation across the membership with a range of commitments. We're all in slightly different places. Quite frankly, there's a range of assumptions out there about whether the equipment will be ready and available. And with the different operating climates, regions that each of us have, that led to some differences in commitments. But the key point was that there was fantastic participation and commitment by the EEI membership in putting our foot where the pedal is. Does that work?
I think that's it.
I will also say, we're looking at this not just from the utility perspective, but for Edison International, we also have our Edison Energy business, which is serving large corporate clients globally, helping them with sustainability and renewables and in other energy transition needs. A number of those customers are looking at electrifying their fleets. And, so Edison Energy is helping them with that. So I think from a corporate level, it was important for us that we have that broad corporate level commitment to sustainability. And I think that's true for a number of the EEI members as well. So pleased about that. Maybe one other place where that credibility that came from EEI participation was so valuable is that through the task force, as I was talking about earlier, we're having a number of discussions with those large customers who are transitioning their fleets. And it is a very different dynamic in the room when you have utility executives talking from a position of understanding the pain points, right? Because there are pain points as you do anything that's new. So I think it's been a good experience for our peers on the transportation task force to walk in the same footsteps of our customers and therefore better be able to improve how we deliver that experience to them.
Yeah, well, I think that initiative really brought about a very large customer of all of ours, Amazon, and the Amazon project that you've worked on, Pedro, is highly important for us to be able to do that successfully and electrify their fleet. But also the largest fleet customer we actually have is the federal government. And we're now working with them and partnered with them to do the same thing. So, Arshad, I wanted you to talk just a little bit because with EPRI's work, it would not be possible for our companies, for example, to be able to identify and strategize around the grid upgrades that are necessary to integrate electric vehicles. So I wanted you to talk about that because without that work, we wouldn't be able to do our work.
I think it's very timely. We just had a call with our board members, actually I think it was yesterday, on the next phase of our working group, which is a companion working group focusing on grid integration, infrastructure planning, resiliency. And it's also investor-owned utilities and public power, co-ops and APPA members. What we are finding out is this is a great opportunity. The infrastructure planning needs to be done. Infrastructure has to be upgraded. But there is also an opportunity that this is not just a load coming to the electric grid. They could actually be a resource if we can do proper charging, smart charging. There's an opportunity. You got 500,000 school buses in US, and each school bus, you could have 150 kilowatt hour battery. They don't operate many times. So you could have mobile storage stationary and actually providing grid flexibility. So our next step working with our members would be this infrastructure bill, the deployment will scale up 3x, 4x next 3 to 4 years. Great opportunity to develop a framework, reference guidebook, methodologies on benefit cost assessment for doing that smart charging, benefit cost assessment for using electric transportation for system benefit, benefit cost assessment to see why it makes sense to put charging infrastructure even before the buses or the cars are ready. So I think we are getting into the next step is not just look at what we have done in the past. All of us have done, all of our members have done demonstrations on V2G, vehicle to grid, vehicle to building. We can learn from that, but now it's not do more demonstrations. Take that learning and actually do at a wide scale. And every service area, every utility has a different market, have a different construct. The benefit cost is not going to be the same everywhere. So we see this infrastructure planning opportunity as both infrastructure planning and upgrading, but also bring in the grid modernization tools that we are investing in so that we don't have to do this all by building transmission and distribution lines. You have to build it. So that's the opportunity, and that's where we know how to build the lines. You know, we know how to put a substation. We know how to make a charge ready. You don't need research for that. Where R&D comes in at the deployment stage is how do we realize the opportunity to give back some to those school districts because we may be able to capitalize those storage for system benefit. And that's really what the phase 2 of our working group on electric transportation. And we are closely linked with APPA, EEI. We got to all be working together. National labs will play a huge role. So this is a great opportunity to all work together, unified vision, electrify mobility this decade, but do it the right way.
You know, Brian, if I could add to that, Arshad, I think you captured it really well. I think about it then beyond transportation. This is really part of the broader reimagining of the grid that we need to do nationally and globally to make sure that the grid is ready and able to drive the clean energy transition. And so, in fact, the SCE published a white paper at the end of last year called Reimagining the Grid. I know we had a lot of good conversations with EPRI about that, Arshad, but you know, we're basically redesigning the airplane while it's flying. And it's about changing the design standards, changing operational practices, hardening the grid to deal with climate adaptation. You know, we're seeing that early on in California with wildfires and the like. So it really goes beyond supporting transportation electrification, and it really goes towards supporting the broader suite of, you know, getting to 100% clean energy, significant amounts of storage, a world with many more distributed resources, not just vehicles. And so, frankly, it's exciting, but it's part of the challenge.
Yeah, interesting that of the $550 billion that passed yesterday, $73 billion is in there, Arshad, for grid modernization to actually integrate those very programs with regards to electric transportation, but also integrating, the massive amount of renewables on our systems. I wanted to get into a little bit harder question because it's a challenging question. If we're really looking to decarbonize, I wanted you to answer a question that with the current generation mix, what it is, and we're clearly not at net zero, but here we are pushing for broader electrification, not only transportation, but broader electrification in society. How does that really work? And do you think that's the right way that it should work with regard to starting that process now, while we know our generation mix, isn't as clean as it should be and will be in the future?
Maybe I'll start, Arshad. And the key to remember here is that we need to make sure that the transition happens so that we do get to net zero across the whole economy, but that it's done reliably and affordably. So even in a state like California, when we run the analysis, we see going to 100% renewable energy by 2045 at the retail level. At the wholesale level, we actually still see a little bit of natural gas-fired resource, even in 2045 when the state is net zero. And the reason for that is that that last CO2 molecule to be removed from the system is so expensive. I think of it as a supply curve, and that last bit of the supply curve is really expensive. So that society will be better off by tolerating that last molecule or two, taking the dollars that would have been required to remove it and instead investing them in other tools that are part of the decarbonization, whether it be greater electrification of other sectors, and also carbon capture. And that could be carbon capture sequestration, that could be direct air capture, that could be natural working lands. But it's, again, about optimizing the economics across the whole economy, not just within the power sector. And so in our case, we see 6% of the electrons being still coming from gas in 2045, 40% of the gas behind that being renewable natural gas. But importantly, if paired with these other technologies. Now, look, I'll be the first to admit, here we are doing this modeling, and actually we did that modeling in 2019. We refreshed it in this year in 2021. We're talking about 2045. So, I'm a scientist by training, just like Arshad. I'm a big believer in the power of technology to continue to develop. So I really hope we are deeply surprised by even faster advances that allow us to go even further within the sector economically and reliably. But at least we know that we have a pathway that gets us to net zero that's achievable. And if the future turns out to be even better, then that's fantastic. But we need to make sure that we are not waiting on a single sector to the detriment of the economics for the whole population, as well as to the detriment of reliability within the sector.
I echo what Pedro just said. I think the transportation sector is already laid in the glide path. That glide path of reducing emission has to start. There are countries who have cleaned their electric sector 20 years ago. And two great countries are France and Canada. They're 80 to 90% clean 20 years ago, but really haven't been able to make a difference on transportation or industry. So I don't think it's late. Now, electric sector is still the tip of the spear. We have to get cleaner. How deep and how quickly we clean has to be really very thoroughly understood. Otherwise, the unintended consequence of either reliability or affordability would be the biggest obstacle for the clean energy transition. What happened in Texas was because we haven't figured out the planning process for extreme weather event. It's not a gas issue or a wind issue or solar issue or nuclear issue. It's an issue of we need to update our planning process. What's happening in Europe right now on affordability side, it's again the planning process. We need to factor in that wind over a 1 in a 10-year period may have a drought, just like we have drought on hydro. We need to figure out that we may need other resources to be there. And this planning process to understand extreme weather event, to understand the new generation mix. In the US, we expect 3x to 4x, which is 600 gigawatt to 800 gigawatt new wind and solar that will come in this 10 years. Our planning, our operation, our markets are not ready yet. That's where the urgency of not just research, but taking the work that has been done, because we have to be careful. The funding is now available. The policy is there. I think state policies will align. But if we change the dial on affordability and reliability too quickly, I think the people will not be happy. And that would be the biggest detriment to the clean energy transition. So go fast, go deep, including the electric sector, but be careful how fast and how deep you go.
That's a good point. Well, there's no way that I'm going to have these two on stage and moderating a panel with them and not talk about something that you two discussed several times here at the COP already. But I wanted you to just, AEI, we've had a carbon-free technology initiative. EPRI has a low-carbon resource initiative that you've put forward, Arshad. And I wanted you two just to really describe a bit, and Pedro, you're an investor. in that program as far as LCRI. And I wanted you to talk about what it means to Edison as far as the future, because you talk about 2045 and we're talking about net zero eventually and what's really needed to get there. And both of you have so eloquently spoken on this issue here at the COP. And I wanted you to share with our audience, both here and virtually, what that really means to you, what it means to Edison to get across the finish line eventually.
Well, if you go back to the Pathway 2045 analysis, that did conclude that not every sector can be electrified easily, or not every application. And so we know that we'll need low carbon fuels for those hard to electrify places in the economy. So you mentioned CFTI, the Carbon Free Technology Initiatives. I've been really pleased that EEI members have come together to collaborate on this initiative that is taking a look at what kind of technologies will be needed and what kind of policies will be needed to support them. Whether the technologies be around advanced renewables or storage or new nuclear or carbon capture. These are all really critical elements. I'll let Arshad talk about the EPRI LCRI initiative with the Gas Technology Institute, but I'll answer why it was important to us, and that's why we were one of the founding members. That and the fact that Arshad is a very persuasive CEO for EPRI, so it's kind of hard to say no to him. But it was hard to say no also because it was a good idea and one that fit with Pathway 2045. We felt pretty good about our understanding of the renewables marketplace. We felt pretty good about understanding of storage. SCE announced 500 megawatts of utility-owned storage it will be deploying in record time by next summer, for example. Feel pretty good about transportation electrification. And building electrification is an area that we're going to be stressing very hard because in our recent Mind the Gap white paper, we saw that that's an area that is really far behind the curve, and we need it to catch up if California is going to meet its 2030 targets. But particularly the area of low carbon resources, low carbon fuels is one where we know it's needed. It's not our strongest point as a company. We're not as deep in that. And so when EPRI presented the opportunity to collaborate with multiple parties across the sector and outside it, it was just frankly one that we couldn't pass up because it allows us then to build up our knowledge and participate in building up the knowledge, globally. So I just should describe.
Well, no, that's. I'll give you a vision, and let's say we are at COP 2030, and we'll remember this COP, and we have been successful. Let's look at a U.S. perspective first. We have been successful in economy by 50% reduction. Let's say our electric sector is 70 to 80% clean. Great. What LCRI does is also make sure in 2030, looking forward to 2040 and 2050, we have the tools in the toolbox to take out the last 20% on the electric sector and to also take the transportation industry and buildings from their glide path to deeper glide path. Right now in worldwide in the US, almost 20% of the energy that we use is electricity. 80% is not. In 2030, it could be, there are ambitious plans, it could be 25, 30%. In 2050, it could be 50% of the energy that we use is electricity. What happens to the other 50%? And that's really what the opportunity of low carbon resource initiative is. The other 50% that is fueled by fossil fuel today will be fueled by new type of molecules that will be created by clean electricity. There are hydrogen, there are liquid ammonia, there's synthetic methane, there are renewable gas. And that's the earth shot, moon shot this decade that LCRI is taking. We have 50 energy companies, we have technology companies like GE, Mitsubishi in it, but I think for LCRI, the biggest thing that happened was yesterday's infrastructure bill. Because while it's a $150 million initiative, doing large-scale projects, you're talking billions of dollars. And there are billions of dollars that just became available for carbon capture and storage, for hydrogen, for running gas turbines that we are running with natural gas today, maybe one day with a combination of hydrogen and natural gas. So that's the LCRI is for the future, but the future work has to start now so that we are ready on the glide path even beyond 2030.
Well, give us a little bit more with regards to, we know what LCRI covers with regard to technologies and looking and, we've been involved in. Pedro's been leading the industry, actually brought us all together in partnership with EPRI to really do a deeper dive into each of the technologies. But tell me from both of your perspective individually, what would you think, what is that Earthshot really look like? What is it, is it hydrogen or is it long duration storage? What is the one that you're most excited about and that you're most excited about getting to demonstration?
Hard to pick one, but I'll pick three. So by 2030, here are the three things that will need to happen. And if we can make that happen through research demonstration, we've done a great job for beyond 2030. One, we've been able to lower the cost of clean hydrogen, which today is around $40 a million BTU, whereas natural gas is $3 to $4 per million BTU. And that reduction in cost will come from technology, policy, deployment. Second, we have good understanding, engineering understanding, scientific understanding on how hydrogen with natural gas blending and at some point pure hydrogen can not only run a gas turbine, but can we be able to store it in the natural gas caverns that are storing natural gas? Can we be able to transport that in the pipelines that are both LDC, in the LDC side and in the medium, upstream side? So I think those engineering answers, once they're ready, hydrogen has a great potential. We can't also forget about carbon capture and storage. Pedro mentioned we are changing the engine of a plane while it's flying, but it's flying on 80% fossil fuel. And if we can't figure out carbon capture and storage sequestration that is affordable and that has the safety built into it, that needs to be done in this 10 years. So I think carbon capture and storage, hydrogen, and the third last thing, but I think one of the most important thing is reimagining nuclear. Nuclear in France, in US, largest clean energy source. The next generation nuclear, the work that's going on, let's put the last stake on the ground of what LCRI should accomplish working with others, is we should have operational full-scale deployment by 2030 of at least one small modular reactor, two, at least one SMR that is on high temperature sodium or molten salt that can produce steam, hydrogen, and electricity. And third, DoD is very engaged, microreactors, 2 to 10 megawatt reactors. They already have announced an actual demonstration in Alaska in an Army base. Because to get to that beyond 2030, net zero, we need to think differently and act differently. And this is the decade to do those pilots, to do the research, so we are ready beyond 2030.
Yeah, I kind of took away really when you started with hydrogen. It just seems to me when you explain it like that, it really highlights the flexibility of hydrogen, which seems to be more promising as far as the infrastructure that you talked about that's already there, and really not having to build out an infrastructure that doesn't exist with regards to carbon storage on CCS. So that was an excellent point there.
Hey, Brian, let me add a couple points to this, though, because I think Arshad, agree with what you said. On the technology front, personally, I'm also tracking and excited about a couple other areas. Just storage, going to new chemistries. As far as the old chemist in me, right? But I'm on the board of Argonne National Lab. It's been the hub for the DOE's Joint Center for Energy Storage Research. And so a lot of exciting stuff coming out of that that's looking at chemistries beyond lithium ion, chemistries that can improve performance, that can rely less on rare earth minerals. So that's one I wanted to put up on the board here. And the other one is different technologies for generating clean electricity, radically different ones. Different ways to capture photons and change them into usable energy. So also on the board of Caltech, and they've had the Joint Center for Artificial Photosynthesis. And I use it as an example of thinking about radically different physics and chemistry that can be able to capture renewable energy in ways that are more efficient and potentially more ubiquitous than the forms that we have today. So lots of technologies, kind of all of the above. I also think, though, it requires policy innovation, right? We need the collaboration with policymakers to go beyond the pilots. Because I agree we need pilots, but at some level, we are out of time for pilots, right? The Mind the Gap work that we recently published says that California needs to quadruple its rate of emissions reduction between now and 2030. So it needs to start quadrupling now in order to get to the 2030 mark. That's a tall order. And we need policies that will also support and incentivize, in cases, deployment through consumer adoption. Right, so as we look at pushing building electrification, that one's less about developing the technologies, it's more about getting them understood and deployed out in customers' homes and businesses. So I think, when I think about innovation, a lot of it is technology, but it's also policy and enabling customer choice.
I'm really interested in, and it's a little bit of a conundrum that exists. And Arshad, I know you're dealing with this because you deal with it all the time, but when government is participating and doing something, and then we also have private, other family foundations and others, or foundations like the Breakthrough Institute, and also the LCRI investment. How do you really corral all of that? Because government is government, right? And then you have everyone else that has different thoughts about what should go first. So how do you really think about that, Arshad? Because I know you're dealing with it, but how do you sort of get everybody a little bit more on the same page so we're not all out there moving in different directions on something that, as Pedro pointed out, is time sensitive?
That's a great question. I'll say one step at a time. So the first step we are taking now is national labs, not just for the early stage technologies that Pedro, you were talking about. They are, and national labs not just in the US, there are national lab-like entities worldwide. They are an absolutely important part on this transition. So we are actually already working with national labs, working with companies like Battelle that manages the national lab to organize our thoughts. So I call it design of experiments. I call it, a full-scale pilot is no longer a pilot. A full-scale deployment, how do we make sure we are learning from not just the LCRI demonstration projects, but projects that Breakthrough Energy may be involved? And in many cases, sharing intelligence, sharing data is there. But you also have to realize that there's a lot of private investment, and they may not want to share the data for the right reason. But there is enough public investments that are going on that will give us a very rich data source to understand how these technologies perform in real life. But to do that, it can't be just LCRI and EPRI. It needs to be a village and national labs, universities, and then all of our members. And our members, we are now working with Shell on hydrogen along with our members, because this clean energy transition, especially LCRI, is blurring the line of energy companies. They all will rely on each other. It's blurring the line between, we just announced industrial clusters. So industrial clusters is a group of industries that needs clean hydrogen, clean oxygen, clean electricity that could be produced centrally. Now you're building partnership with energy companies and chemical companies, steel companies. That's the opportunity of the future. But as we are realizing the opportunity through LCRI, we cannot forget what we need to do today. And I'll go back to it. We got to totally revamp our planning process to not only handle the generation change mix that we will see, wind and solar, but the extreme weather that we are already seeing and will be seeing more. So it's both do the work this decade to make a change, but also do the innovation and thinking that will help us to make the change in the next decade.
Right. Well, when we think about commercially deployable, and these demonstrations that you identified, Arshad, give us a little bit of an idea of something that I know is important to Pedro. When's it going to be affordable, though? And when you start mapping this out, I have not, every summer seminar that I've been to at EPRI, we've always had the pathway, right, that we go over every year. So when you think about affordability, when do you think that demonstration and we can actually move to where Pedro's looking for, which is going to be affordability for his customers? So when do you think, what does that timeline look like? What does the time frame look like?
Electric transportation is already affordable. So it's now. But great question. I go back to early 2000. Solar and wind was not affordable.
Yeah.
They were 10 times more expensive than getting electricity from the grid. But this is where the policy comes in. This is where the regulation comes in. How did it become affordable? Not because there was a technology breakthrough since 2000 to now. It's because the number of deployment increased significantly because there was public policy and regulation that incentivized. In 2000, if you're in Germany, Germany is known as one of the countries that started with the solar. Feed-in tariff was 35 cents a kilowatt hour. Grid electricity was 6 cents a kilowatt hour. That caused a massive amount of solar to come into the German system. And then you look at our feed-in tariff, our PTC and ITC. Without enabling policy that significantly increases deployment, that's the trigger to help the manufacturing side to continue to automate and reduce their cost. And affordability will be there if we do that. Technology alone, innovation alone will not make it affordable.
I'm not letting you off the hook.
Okay.
The time frame. When do you think, and what technology? I mean, you identified 3, but if you said something was going to be more affordable at some point before others, what is Pedro going to be looking at? What is he going to be planning for?
Electrolyzers and hydrogen, with the amount of funding that's already going in for deployment, I would say that has a great chance within this decade to reach a level of affordability. I think advanced nuclear will not by 2030. I think advanced nuclear would be in the early stage. It would be more in the 2035 stage. Carbon capture and storage, if you look at it, it's actually already there. You can do carbon capture and storage at $30, $40 a ton, cost of carbon capture and storage. Biggest challenge is the public perception on sequestration and making sure that sequestration can be done safely. So I would say this decade, from an affordability point of view, carbon capture and storage has the best potential. Hydrogen, great chance. Nuclear, early, but we should have deployable reactors of these new types by 2030.
Flip the question around. I mean, Brian, it's a good question and good answer, but I want to flip the question around. All right, what does affordable mean? Affordable in part is cents per kilowatt hour, dollars per megawatt hour per megawatt. Right? It's also dollars per million tons of GHG reduced. Right? And as a society, do we or do we not have a boundary constraint here that says that we need to reduce emissions? Well, we do. So I think it flips the question around to let's figure out what the target is. That's what we're here for, right? It's about reaching 1.5 or limiting temperature rise on average to 1.5 C. I heard Secretary Kerry say a couple nights ago that if you add up the NDCs across the various countries that have submitted them, you know, the modeling that's suggesting that that might get us to 1.8, not all the way to 1.5, but it's below 2, and you know, it's great progress. So to some extent, we're going to have to bank on the benefits and use that to then think about policies that help, I'll use the S word, subsidize some of the technologies in order to achieve that goal. The other piece on this is that, you know, you were focusing on supply technologies, Arshad. I'm really focused on end-use technologies that are actually consuming the electricity. You know, this panel's about transportation, and so let's focus on that one. Like you said, transportation electrification for the average consumer with an average vehicle, maybe not a super high-end vehicle, that's a cost parity today on a total cost of ownership basis. Now, that individual consumer does not typically think about total cost of ownership. They think about the amount of the check that they need to write or the loan that they need to get at the car dealership. And so that's where incentives and support are so important. And I know we've had programs at the federal level with the tax credits. Same thing in California. There's some state level tax credits, as well as programs that we've had with the proceeds from the low carbon fuel standard, where I think today it's $750 per vehicle for used vehicles, you know, on the hood incentive, if I got the number right. Those are critical because those say from a societal perspective, we understand that there is a net benefit in having the transition. Oh, by the way, our Pathway 2045 analysis showed that, you know, if you make all these investments, when you get to 2045, the average customer will actually be spending 1/3 less in real terms on their total energy bill. Electricity will be higher because they'll be using more, right? But they'll be using less gasoline, less gas. Electric technologies are more efficient, so they'll be spending 1/3 less. And we need policies that grab a bit of that pot of gold, factor it forward to the future, use it as incentives to make sure that we actually get to that future. And importantly, that to my earlier point, that help get our low-income and disadvantaged customers participating in the transition, because the reality is they are bearing more than their fair share of the brunt of climate change today and of air quality issues and the like. So that's a really important one as well.
Well, I'm glad that we got to cover the bipartisan infrastructure package and what that investment actually means to the industry. But we still have one more thing to do, which is the Build Back Better legislation. Almost $1.8 trillion includes social safety net, but also $550 billion again for climate. And what do you think, give me your thoughts about what does it mean for clean energy? What does it mean going forward? I mean, Arshad, you know, it has a very generous hydrogen PTC in it, but it has many things, Pedro, that you're looking for, not just in electric transportation, the solar PTC, storage and transmission. It's just a Christmas tree. So give me your thoughts about what it means for the company.
I'll keep this short. Bottom line is, it's not what it means for the company. It's what it means for our customers. Yep. And particularly when you look at the tax credits in there, all those benefits ultimately accrue to our customers. They allow us to manage rates, keep it more affordable, while making the transition a real one, right? And so, when we think about the tax credits, those hopefully will reduce the cost that that we see in terms of power purchase agreements, or that particularly if our peers are building their own utility rate-based assets, or like the storage assets that we're adding now, that all reduces the cost to the customer, makes the transition much more affordable. So that's the key. That also then enables the industry to do the things that we need to do to contribute, right? The partnerships we're doing, for example, the coalitions that we've created, and I'll put a plug here quickly for EEI, Brian, but EEI has really helped sponsor bringing together the Midwest EV collaboration and the Electric Highway Coalition to form the National Electric Highway Coalition. Got 46 member companies and one electric co-op that have joined that, serving 100 million U.S. electric customers across 46 states and D.C., and we're also part of the National EV Charging Initiative. Those initiatives will be benefiting the infrastructure bill and Build Back Better. That's a way to then get the networks built up, get them interconnected, and really make the promise of deploying vehicles that can go from one end of the country to the other. So I see the Build Back Better bill making things more affordable, but also enabling these collaborations that will move the ball forward.
I couldn't agree more. I think when we talk about tools in the toolbox, the tools are not just technology tools. Tools are policy levers that specially changes customer behavior. LED light in 2005 was cheaper than incandescent from total cost of ownership. But as Pedro mentioned, customers are not economists, and they don't think about total cost of ownership. We spend $6 billion in US and Canada to provide help to customers on energy efficiency programs. That has now led to LED light becoming at a point where you buy an LED light and you can buy that even with first cost. So the Build Back America plan, whether it's incentive, whether it's PTC, whether it's ITC, there are different policy instruments. Each one of them will actually help in making these technologies more affordable to the customers to start with. So I think it's an important part, and we are hoping for the next steps.
Well, let's just send the message back to Washington to get it done. I think you all being here and participating and evangelizing the industry is so important, but we also know that we need that. Absent real climate policy, that is the climate policy that we need to get over the finish line. So we're calling on Washington to get that done. But as you can see, we're lucky to have these two global leaders here today. Really appreciate both of your time. Thank you all for joining us here in Glasgow, and thank you for joining us online as well. Thank you all.
Thank you much.
Thank you.